All right, so now we're ready to start adding our refining layers, our final layers. So I'm going to make a new layer on top of everything else. I'm going to lower our previous layer, lower the opacity down quite a bit to around 20%. And on this layer, when we start to refine things, we're going to start working in some details and experiment with some things I might like, right? So for example, I'm thinking I want him to have a little bit of a tribal feel, so I'm going to put like kind of like a piercing or something going through his nose. I was thinking about maybe some necklaces he has hanging down that he perhaps wears, and thinking there would probably be maybe what if there's like a string hanging between these. I think that kind of actually looks pretty cool. We'll have to get that right though. What about, oops, don't want to select that. I'm thinking these are gonna have like claws or feathers or something on them. Let's see, let's do, probably have some bracelets or something on his forearms of some sort. So maybe it's like on his forearms is like these feather bracers he has. How's that look? Not sure I like that. Let's instead just go with, yeah, maybe let's just do something like this where it wraps around. Let's do his staff. Let's rework that staff. I decided that I had this cool idea for kind of like this big blade type thing going on the end that I wanted to incorporate instead of what we had before. And we're just going to draw the handle down here. And this is going to be, I'm thinking this will be like super intricate, okay? Like it's going to have a bunch of markings in here, maybe like some holes cut into it, right? So you would be able to see through the other side. Something like this, and then maybe like a few little knocks in the blade itself. And then this would have a bit of a wrap on it with some sort of danglies. Okay, and these I'm thinking will be like some sort of piece of braiding, and then at the end we could have like a little skull. Pretty small. We'll have to really refine it in our final layer after this one, but we'll block it in right now. So he's got this little skull hanging off the end of his big weapon here. Then so we have that. Do we want something on both arms or just one? How about on this other arm we put like some bracelet type things? For his tail, I'm wondering how it might look to put spikes on this like that. I think that looks pretty cool actually. And then, anything else? Could probably add some markings, but I don't know if I will add that in the sketch. That might be something I would add when I'm painting it later, is kind of like war paint sort of stuff like that. But what we can add, if we are going to add anything else, would be maybe like if we're going to add some horns, we could add those now. That's something that I might like. Yeah, I think that looks really cool actually. But this other one, we want it to make sure we're getting it right in perspective. Do we want it to be facing more backwards or more out at an angle? I think something like that looks good, and then we can have all these feathers on his head coming down. Okay. Just defining that a little bit more there. And I think that looks about good. So we can go ahead and lower the opacity on this. And we're going to lower the layer beneath it even more a little bit. Okay. And we're going to make a new layer. And this one is probably going to be our final layer. I'm going to try and make this one the last one. And this is going to be where we really start to go in and tighten stuff up, right? This is the end of the sketch basically, where if we want to present it, this is the point we would present it at. So all the lines we're going to try and make pretty clean, right? It's not going to need to be perfect, right? It's not like a fully rendered drawing. We're not going through and really adding any sort of necessarily shading or anything like that, but we do want it to be very easily readable. And you know what? To do that, we're going to start over. I'm going to lower my brush size so I can get a little bit tighter with some of the shapes I'm doing here. Really paying attention to stroke weight as well as line quality, you know, how smooth my curves are. Making sure that everything is in the perfect spot. So if that means tightening up some of the perspective as we go, gonna have him have a little bit of like a crooked tooth here, give him a little bit more character. Okay. Gonna bring his chin. Okay. His teeth here. Really trying to make sure I keep things looking consistent, like they kind of belong to make sense, right? You can see how a lot of my outside lines are a little bit darker, right? I'm using that line weight to my advantage, while some of the inside ones I keep a little bit more light and thin to suggest some sort of detail work going on. Going to work in a little bit of wrinkles and stuff going on in here, and then a little bit of scales on his jaw. We're going to work his horn in, at least the base of it. We're going to start with the base, and then work some of these little tiny horns on his eyebrow in. Zoom in a little closer so we can see better. Alright, and we can decide, let's do his eye. So let's draw in this horn here. You know what, actually before we do that, I'm just going to add a little bit of line weight over here to this eye so that it feels a little bit farther back in space. Really get the sense that it's kind of getting pushed back there. Kind of add a few scales on his cheek here, around his eye area. We'll do some of those little spines on this eye, the other side of his jaw showing over there. Okay, that looks good. Let's get his horn in here now. The other great thing about working digitally is that you can just turn the canvas to whatever angle works best for you. You can do the same thing with a piece of paper, you just turn the whole paper, but if you're working on something really big, you can't usually do that. But with this, you can just kind of scale everything down and tilt it to whatever your preference is. We want to make sure we get the perfect line there, like that. Okay. Okay, let's get this other horn back here as well. Most of it's going to be covered up by feathers or the stuff on his head, so I'm not going to draw that bottom line yet, but we're going to add a few more details in here to his face, and I want him to look a little bit more snaggle-toothed than he already does. So I'm just going to add a few extra teeth that are kind of like growing through his gums a little bit, and then a little bit of a scaly texture going on his top of his head, on his nose. We'll see if we can pull off these sort of like a scale plate on his head. Working some scales in down here on his nose. Alright, so I'm going to start working on these feathers now that are going to be coming out. Feathers, spines, not super clear on what they are, but that's okay. You can kind of leave that up to the imagination for the viewer to decide what they are. You know what, before we do that though, before we get too far in that anyways, I want to bring a little bit of overlap in there. Then we're going to make sure that we get his neck drawn in here. Really trying to make sure we get these feeling like they're kind of going back in space, like they have some depth to them. Okay, get his collarbones in there. Excellent. Let's move on to his shoulder area. The face is probably one of the hardest parts, I think, personally. It just requires a lot of detail and attention because that's where people are going to look. So I think we can make the rest of this go by a little quicker. Let's make that a little cleaner. We're going to draw his bicep here. And we're going to come back in and add those scales towards the end that we're going to put on the rest of his body. Let's add some of this jewelry so that we don't have to worry about going back and erasing a bunch of overlapping stuff. We'll have it come down. And we need to make sure we draw the other side of his feathers too, coming down on the other side of his head as well. You know what? Before I forget, I just noticed this. We need to rework some of these feathers so that they have a little bit more dimension. So we can see a few more that are going back in the other direction. So right now, they're all kind of going one way, and it doesn't quite feel like it makes a lot of sense. So that's better. Then we can have some coming down on this side, and it will actually make sense as to why they're there. Alright, so we got that necklace. Let's do 2 of them. And on the smaller one, I think I'm going to put like some block type shapes, some squares. Okay, and then on this one, it will be I guess they're either, I don't know, spikes or like rib bones of something. And then I can go in and erase that line. So we have that necklace in there. Let's keep working on the details here. We have these muscles that are coming down from back on his side. We have his actual stomach that is kind of pretty close to these lines from the necklace. Looks good. We have his well, let's do his tail actually. We're gonna put some, instead of just making it round, we are just gonna put some scales though. We'll do that. And then our last row of scales along this one. The way I know how to kind of just draw these scales in my head so that they look somewhat realistic, or they look like kind of like they could exist, is because I've done a lot of studies, right? I've looked at a lot of pictures of, of lizards and snakes and reptiles and stuff like that. And so it just takes practice, That's why I say you got to draw from life if you really want to draw well out of your imagination, because that's where this kind of sense of believability comes from, is from drawing it out of life. And then we'll put spikes on each of these center ones going down. Okay, and then kind of just some of these skin folds that we see here along the bottom. And then let's do his stump of a tail here at the end. And he'll have these spikes that are coming off of it. And let's go in here and clean that up. Now I want you to imagine what it would have been like if I had just started drawing this without, doing all these layers, taking a moment to think about what I was drawing. It really would not have turned out this great, right? If I would have just gone straight into this layer and tried to draw everything the first time around and nail everything down in place, it wouldn't have turned out very good, right? I would have gotten way too committed to bad decisions that I didn't want to go back and change, and I would have ended up being stuck with them and keeping it, even though it wasn't the best option, right? But because we did all these layers, we took a second to think about what it was we wanted to draw. We were able to come up with something way cooler, way better than what we probably would have come up with otherwise, right? So that's why it's important to do this. Now your assignment for this one is going to be to do the same thing, right? You guys are going to draw your own object out of your head, and I want you to build it up using layers. You need to do at least 4 layers. Well, let's say 3, at least 3, okay? So like a beginning layer, a refinement layer, and then your final layer, okay? In order to call this one good. So do at least 3 layers and draw something out of your imagination, okay? In the next lectures, we're going to go over some other exercises you can do to kind of help brainstorm some ideas, but I want you for this one to just come up with something straight out of your brain that's all you. Okay? So that's your assignment for this one. Follow the same steps I did. Draw something different, obviously, right? Draw your own take on whatever it is you're gonna draw. But I want you to do the same thing, right? Come up with an idea. Take a moment to think about what it is you want to draw. Then think about kind of what the pose is going to be, what it is, or how the composition is going to be. If it's an object, think about, are you just going to draw it floating in space? Is it going to be sitting on something? Is someone going to be using it? Okay, so think about that. Or if it's a landscape, how are you going to orient it? And then you're going to start out with your rough layers like we did here. Rough layers, do a couple of those to really figure out where it is things are going to go. And then your final layers, right?